orchestrated fresh character names, plot mechanics, and American cultural details for News Story. Orchestrated fresh character names, plot mechanics, and American cultural details for News Story. I spent 41 years married to a man who measured his words the way he measured lumber twice before he ever made the cut. So my husband set his fork down at the dinner table that night, looked at me over the candles, and said in that low, even voice of his that I should move every dollar we had into my own name. I should have understood the cut was already coming. I didn't. I laughed at him. My name is Vera. I'm 66 years old, and if you give me the next little while, I'll tell you how a quiet anniversary supper turned into the last real conversation I ever had with the only man I've ever loved. We were sitting in the dining room of the house we built outside Halloran, Ohio, not the house he could have afforded, the modest one he liked, the one with the porch he sanded by hand. It was a Saturday in October. The radiator ticked. He'd grilled steaks because he didn't trust anybody else to grill steaks, and I'd made the potatoes the way his mother used to, and for once neither one of us mentioned the business or the grandkids or his blood pressure. We just sat there grateful, the way you get when you've been married long enough to know how rare an easy evening really is. He'd had a good year. Tillerson Building Supply, the company he started with one borrowed flatbed truck and a handshake loan from a man who's long dead now, had just closed the biggest contract of his life, a regional distribution deal that pushed everything we owned to right around $22 million. He used to say that number out loud like it embarrassed him. A kid who grew up sharing a bedroom with 3 brothers in Lorraine wasn't supposed to end up with $22 million. He never quite believed it belonged to him. After the pie, he leaned back and got that look, the one that meant he'd been turning something over for a while. "Vera," he said, "I want you to move it all. The accounts, the company holdings. Put it in your name, just yours." "Move it where?" I said. "It's already half mine." "All of it," he said. "I mean it, first thing Monday." I remember reaching over and feeling his forehead like he was one of the kids. "Honey, are you running a fever? You sound like the fellas on the radio telling everybody to bury gold in the backyard." He didn't smile the way I wanted him to. He took my hand instead and held it on the tablecloth. "It's not about being scared," he said. "It's about being ready. Some things at the office aren't sitting right. I trust you to hold steady if I can't. That's all. You've always been the one who keeps her head." There was a hitch in his breath when he said it. He'd had a heart event 4 years back, a long scare, a winter of pills lined up on the windowsill, and I learned not to push him when he got like this. So I gave in, the way you give in to somebody you've forgiven 1,000 times. "All right," I said. "Monday. But only because you asked me nice." He squeezed my hand. "That's my girl. Now no more business. Dance with me." There wasn't even music on. He hummed it himself. Something slow from before we were married, and we shuffled around the kitchen tile in our socks like we used to when the kids were asleep upstairs. His hand was warm in the small of my back, and I swear to you, for about 3 minutes the whole world felt finished in the best way. Later, drying dishes, I caught him watching me from the doorway. Just watching. "What?" I said. "Nothing," he said. "Just looking at you while I can." Monday morning, I did exactly what he asked. I drove down to the bank. I signed where they told me to sign. The compliance officer initialed everything. A notary stamped it, and a young teller printed me a confirmation slip warm off the machine. I took a picture of it and texted it to him with a little heart. He texted back a thumbs up and 3 words. "Thank you. Love you." That was Monday at 10 in the morning. By Tuesday night, the phone rang while I was folding his undershirts, and a calm voice told me my husband had collapsed at the office, and I needed to come to Mercy General right away. If you've ever had a day start in something that felt like grace and end in a hospital hallway, do me a favor and write the word "here" in the comments. Just here, so I know I'm not telling this to an empty room, because that's where I ended up that night, and I had never felt more alone in my life. I don't remember the drive. I remember the rain coming sideways across the windshield, and the wipers not keeping up and praying out loud, the kind of prayer that doesn't have any real words in it. I remember a nurse with tired eyes meeting me at the doors and not saying anything, which told me everything. I remember the room where the machines weren't making any sound at all. He looked smaller than he'd ever looked. A man who filled doorways his whole life, and there he was, still. The doctor came in and said the words they're trained to say. Cardiac arrest. We did everything we could. The paramedics worked on him for a long time, and I sat down in the plastic chair and held his hand, which was already going cool. And I called him by the name, only I called him until a young nurse came to check the monitors and stopped at the foot of the bed. Mrs. Tillerson, she said carefully, I don't want to overstep, but your husband wasn't by himself when it happened. I looked up. There was a man here when the squad brought him in, she said. Family, I think. He gave the front desk your daughter's name. Said he'd handle the paperwork. My daughter. I have one child, a daughter, and she lives 40 minutes away with her husband, and neither one of them had called me. I was still working that out when the elevator chimed down the hall, and I turned, and there they were. My daughter and her husband walking toward me, and a third man in a gray suit a step behind carrying a leather folder. I stood up out of the chair with my arms half open, because she was my baby and her father was lying right there, and I needed her the way you need air. I said her name. I think I said it twice. She stopped about 6 feet short of me. She didn't cry. She looked at her husband first, then at me, and she said, Mom, we need to talk about Dad's accounts. This is our attorney. We just want to make sure everything's done right. I replayed that sentence more times than I can count. The body of my husband not yet cold in the bed behind me, and the first words out of my only child's mouth were about money. What? I said. It was all I could manage. The man in the gray suit stepped forward and offered me his condolences in a voice as smooth as a banker's. Mrs. Tillerson, I'm sorry for your loss. I only need a moment. We'll need documentation regarding the wire transfers executed over the last couple of days, the ones moving the holdings into your sole name, just so we can keep the estate clean through probate. I looked at my son-in-law. He's a tall man, always dressed a notch sharper than the room. He wouldn't meet my eyes. It's procedure, Vera, he said. That's all. Procedure, I repeated. My voice came out wrong. Her father has been dead for an hour. There's still tape on his arm from the IV, and you brought a lawyer to a hospital. We're trying to protect what Dad built, my daughter said, and she said Dad lick it tasted bad. Do you have any idea how many people come out of the woodwork when somebody dies with money? Who's coming out of the woodwork? I said. I'm his wife. I'm standing in front of you. She didn't answer that. The attorney slid a thin folder across the rolling tray table toward me, the kind they put your dinner on. On the cover, in dark letters, it said, Petition for Temporary Restraining Order. And right then, in that humming little room, with the rain on the window and my husband gone behind me, I understood that the 3 people who'd walked off that elevator had not come because they loved him. They'd come because they'd been waiting. They buried him on a Friday. My daughter handled the arrangements, white roses, the good church, the closed casket, and she did it all without once looking my way. People kept telling me how strong she was, how she was being so strong for her mother, and I'd nod and say thank you and think about the folder on the dinner tray. At the luncheon afterward, I stepped out onto the church steps for some air, and I heard her husband's sister talking low to somebody by the railing. They went at it again that last week, the sister was saying, over the company. Trent thought he was finally getting handed the keys, and the old man told him flat out no. Somebody shushed her, but I'd heard it. They went at it again. My husband had never said one word to me about fighting with my son-in-law. Some things at the office aren't sitting right. I stood there on the cold steps holding a paper cup of bad coffee and felt the floor of my whole life shift about a quarter inch. That same week, the calls started. Not condolence calls, account calls. Our personal banker, apologetic, telling me a court order had frozen every joint account and every business holding pending a fiduciary review, and that the petition had been filed by my own daughter and her husband less than 12 hours after the death certificate cleared. 12 hours. They hadn't even let the ink dry. They'd left their father's body at the hospital and gone straight to a judge. I called the one person my husband had told me to call if anything ever went sideways, Marvin Holt, his attorney for 30 years. A small, careful man with reading glasses, he was always cleaning. He came to the house that afternoon with his coat still wet from the rain, sat down in the study where my husband's glasses were still folded on the blotter, and didn't waste my time. I'm going to tell you something he hoped he'd never have to, Marvin said. These last few months, your husband found money walking out of the company. Quiet amounts dressed up as consulting fees and vendor payments routed to little shell companies. He traced the authorizations back to your son-in-law's executive login. He didn't want to believe it. He kept hoping he was wrong. I just sat there. That's why he moved everything to you, Marvin said gently. It wasn't paranoia, Vera. If the board investigation went where he thought it would, he needed the fortune somewhere it couldn't be touched or rewritten. He needed it with the one person he trusted completely. That was you. And here's the part a lot of folks ask about, so let me answer it plainly, because I had to learn it the hard way myself. People wonder how a man can just hand his whole estate to his wife 2 days before he dies and have it hold up. The answer is that it was all done while he was alive, in his right mind, signed and notarized and witnessed at the bank, every timestamp matching where he was standing. It wasn't a will somebody could contest. It was a completed, legal transfer. That's exactly why he did it that way. He knew a will could be dragged through court for years. A gift made clean while he was breathing couldn't. Marvin opened his briefcase and took out a long envelope. The flap still sealed, my name across the front in my husband's blocky handwriting. For Vera. Only if I'm gone. My hands shook so hard I could barely break the seal. Inside was one sheet of paper. Vera F., you're reading this. Then the thing I was afraid of came and found me. I saw it too late and I said too little because I didn't want it to be true. I need you to protect what we made. Don't let anybody rewrite the books or the man I was. You were always the steady one. That's why it has to be you. I read it 4 times. When I looked up, Marvin had taken his glasses off and was just holding them. He thought our son-in-law would steal from him, I said. He hoped he wouldn't, Marvin said, but hope doesn't balance a ledger. If you're listening to this and somebody in your own family has ever made you feel guilty for protecting what's yours, tell me about it down below. I read everyone. I wish somebody had told me sooner that family is not the same word as safe. The freeze was the cruelest part. They'd built it to look responsible. We're just guarding the estate's liquidity while it choked off my ability to pay a single bill. And it parked my daughter's husband one signature away from running the company my husband bled for. Marvin warned me it would be a long fight, that the courts move slow and treat family soft. Then he said something that changed how I saw all of it. The real question isn't whether your husband signed those transfers, he said. We can prove that in our sleep. The question is why he felt like he had to. To understand that, we have to understand what happened in that office the night he collapsed. Who was there? Who came? Who left? So we started pulling on the thread. The first place it led was the office itself. Marvin got me in on the excuse of collecting personal property, and the staff kept their distance like grief was something you could catch. Down on the loading side I found Hank, the night security man who'd been with the company 19 years. My husband used to bring him coffee on the early shifts. Hank took his cap off when he saw me and held it against his chest. Mrs. Tillerson, he said. I've been sick about it. I was on the floor that night. Tell me what you saw, I said, please. He swallowed. Around 8:15, I heard your husband and your son-in-law going at it in the corner office. Loud. Your son-in-law said something like, you treat me like I'm still the kid you hired. Then I heard glass break a tumbler, I think. A minute later, your son-in-law come out fast and look at nobody, straight to the elevator. I figured I'd give the boss a minute to cool off. His voice cracked. I should have checked on him. I should have. It's not your fault, I told him, and I meant it. Marvin had Hank pull the badge logs. We stood in the crap security office with the monitors humming, and the screen laid the whole night out in cold little numbers. My daughter, badged in at 7:31, out at 7:39, 8 minutes, in and out. My son-in-law, in at 8:02, out at 8:24, and then in again at 8:41. No exit time after that. He came back, Marvin said quietly, reading it twice to be sure. He came back 15 minutes later and stayed until after the collapse. What was he doing here twice, I said. It wasn't really a question. Hank looked at the floor. When the alarm went off, ma'am, he was the one ran out front and told us to call 911. Calm as Sunday. My daughter had come by earlier carrying a little paper sack from the office cafeteria. Dropping off dinner for her dad, somebody told me. 10 minutes, in and out. I held on to that detail without knowing yet why it mattered. It mattered because of the nurse. My husband had a visiting cardiac nurse who managed his medications after the stent came twice a month, adjusted his beta blockers, kept his chart. Her name was Dana. Marvin and I sat across a little table from her in a borrowed office, and she came in already looking like a woman who hadn't slept right in weeks. Guilt has a posture. I know it now. Marvin slid a copy of the chart across to her. There are 2 versions of the same dosage record, he said. One's a revision entered 2 hours after the original. No supervising physician signed off. Can you walk us through that? Her hands wouldn't stay still. I corrected an entry, she said. That's all. I caught a mistake and fixed it. Which dose was the mistake? Marvin asked. The first or the second? She didn't answer. Who told you to make the change, Dana? He said, soft as anything. The silence stretched until it broke her. His daughter-in-law called me. She caught herself. His son-in-law's no. His daughter. The daughter called. She said her father had been confused, forgetting pills, and she didn't want him embarrassed in front of the doctor. She asked me to go in and clean up the chart before anybody looked too close. She said it was kindness. And this, Marvin said, and laid down a second sheet. A bank disbursement. $40,000 from a company sub-account paid 3 days before the revision marked consulting services. The recipient's name was hers. Every drop of color went out of her face. That came through a vendor, she whispered. I thought it was a bonus. I never signed anything. I swear before God I didn't think. You didn't think what exactly? I said. I didn't plan to speak. Say it. She looked at me and her eyes filled up. I didn't think anybody would die. I've never felt my own heart go that cold and that quiet at the same time. I looked at this trembling young woman and I felt no pity, none. And that scared me more than anything had yet. You didn't just hurt him, I said. You helped erase him. Marvin gathered the papers like a man closing a door. You're going to cooperate, he told her. Fully. I'm filing to have the cause of death reopened as undetermined. Detectives will be in touch. The day after that, I went into my husband's study alone and I started looking. I don't even know what I thought I'd find. Closure, maybe. Some last piece of him. His daily pill organizer was still on the desk. Every bottle turned label out the way he kept things. Fussy to the end. And in the bottom of his desk drawer, when I ran my fingers along the back of it, I felt a ridge that shouldn't have been there. A false bottom. He'd built it himself. The man could build anything. Underneath it was a small amber bottle wrapped in a tissue. The label said it was a natural sleep aid, the kind they sell at the health food store, the kind my husband would have laughed at and never in his life put in his mouth. About a third of it was gone. Marvin came when I called, and his eyebrows went up the second he saw it. Where was this? Hidden, I said. In his own desk. He never took anything like this. He hid it because he knew. I have a friend from junior college, Yolanda, who runs a lab over in the next county. I drove the bottle to her that same afternoon and asked her, quietly, off the books, to tell me what was in it. She put a single drop on a test strip and watched the color change, and her whole face changed with it. Vera, she said slowly, this isn't any sleep aid. There's a sedative compound in here. For a man with a heart history, on the medications you're describing, taken regularly, this could throw his rhythm off badly enough to stop his heart. And it would read like a natural cardiac arrest. Nobody would think to look. The room got very far away. Somebody made this, I said. Somebody who knew exactly what they were doing, she said, and her voice was so gentle it nearly broke me. Where did you get it? I told her it was my husband's. She put her hand over mine and didn't say anything else. That night, Marvin stood on my porch with his collar turned up against the wind, and I handed him the bottle and Yolanda's note, and he read it twice. We don't tell anyone yet, he said. Not the press, not the police, not your daughter, not until the testing is locked down and irrefutable. Once we move, there's no taking it back. He looked older than I'd ever seen him. Because this isn't a sad story about a man's heart anymore, Vera. This is a homicide. I want to stop here for a second and ask you something, because I've thought about it every day since. If it had been your child, if you'd raised them, packed their lunches, sat up nights with their fevers, how long would it take you to believe they could do something like this? Tell me honestly. It took me far too long. A mother's last instinct is to find another explanation. There wasn't one. The first hearing wasn't even the criminal case. It was the civil fight over the freeze. My son-in-law's slick attorney standing up in a paneled courtroom in front of a county judge and suggesting with that practice sorrow lawyers turn on and off, that a grieving widow with full run of her husband's office might have, shall we say, influenced a sick man into signing away everything 2 days before he died. We have no witness to this so-called request, he said. No medical clearance that he was competent, no board approval for the business holdings. A transfer of this size, this fast and secret, raises serious questions of undue influence. He let undue influence hang there like he'd left a window open. Marvin stood up the way water rises, no hurry in him at all. Unusual is not unlawful, Your Honor, he said. Every transfer was authorized by the decedent personally, executed at the bank, notarized, witnessed, with location data and timestamps that match his physical presence to the minute. I have it all here. He set a folder on the clerk's table. And if opposing counsel wishes to argue that my client's late husband wasn't of sound mind, the court might first ask why his daughter and her husband, who stood to inherit through his estate, rushed to freeze every account he owned less than 12 hours after his death certificate was signed, before the funeral, before the obituary even ran. I watched my son-in-law's jaw go tight. I watched my daughter's hand slide over his too fast. And I watched the judge's eyebrow climb, and I knew, the way you know weather, that the wind had just turned. The criminal charges came 3 weeks later, after Yolanda's lab work was confirmed by the county's own people, after the detective, a steady woman named Ruiz, who never once raised her voice, walked the timeline and the bank trail and the chart revision in the bottle into the prosecutor's office and laid it all on the desk. They arrested my son-in-law first. They arrested my daughter the same afternoon. And then my daughter started to talk. Detective Ruiz told me this part herself, sitting at my kitchen table with her hat in her hands. My daughter claimed she didn't know it would kill him. She said her husband told her it would only settle him down, make him pliable, easier to push towards signing the company over. She said it was supposed to make him tired, confused, agreeable. She named her husband as the one who got the compound, who paid the nurse who came back into the building that second time. She gave them all of it to save herself. I sat with that for a long while. My daughter, who I taught to ride a bike on the gravel drive, who I walked down the aisle 2 years after her father gave the toast my daughter had carried a bag of poison into her father's office and called it dinner. 18 years for him, Ruiz said quietly. Conspiracy and manslaughter. 15 for her tampering, bribery, cooperation taken into account. The DA's finalizing it. They'll stand in front of the judge Monday. I waited to feel something sharp. Triumph. Fury. Anything that matched the size of what they'd done. All I felt was hollow, a cold, ringing emptiness right under my ribs, like a bell that's been struck and won't stop humming. The last reading of the estate happened in my husband's old study a few weeks after the sentencing, and it was the smallest, quietest gathering you ever saw. Marvin, 2 of his partners, and 3 men who'd worked for my husband since the early days and loved him like blood. No press, no cameras, just the truth said plainly in legal language. Marvin read the amended trust clause, the one my husband executed 3 days before he passed aloud. Every asset transferred to me stood legal, binding, and beyond challenge. The court recognized me as the sole owner and executor of everything. The Shell vendor money that had been siphoned out, all 1.3 million of it, had been recovered and returned to the company accounts, and every loyal employee who'd been pushed out in the chaos had been brought back, salaries restored, back pay cut. One of the old men, a bookkeeper named Earl who'd been with my husband since the flatbed truck days, cleared his throat and couldn't quite get the words out at first. "Mrs. Tillerson," he finally said, "on behalf of all of us, thank you for not letting it end the wrong way." "It isn't over," I told him. "It's just honest again." When the rest of them filed out and it was only Marvin and me left in the quiet, I walked the length of the long table to the chair at the far end. The one my daughter always took at family meetings, back when she still called her father Daddy and meant it. The leather was unworn. The chair sat pulled out a little from the table, the way a person leaves it when they think they're coming right back. "He told me to keep it safe," I said, looking at that empty chair. "Now I understand why." Marvin gathered his papers. "He chose right," he said. I stayed behind after he left and listened to his footsteps fade down the hall, and then it was just me and the grandfather clock my husband wound every Sunday of his life. I sat down in his chair at the head of the table. On the blotter in front of me, I had laid out 3 things that afternoon: his battered leather work gloves, worn soft and dark at the palms; the old bone-handled pocket knife he'd carried since the day he signed for that first truck; and his wedding ring, which had never once left his hand in 41 years, until a nurse slid it off and put it in a plastic bag. People keep calling me brave. I don't feel brave. I felt like a woman doing the one thing left to do. I went to that sentencing, by the way. I sat in the back row and I watched them lead my daughter out, her head down, and I didn't go to her and I didn't look away either. It wasn't forgiveness that put me in that seat. It was proof that love doesn't die just because the people you gave it to turned out not to deserve it. I picked up the wedding ring and turned it in the light. Inside the band, worn nearly smooth, was the date we married, and one word he'd have engraved: "There is a young man who couldn't afford it. Always." I slid it onto my thumb because it was too big for any other finger, and I sat there in the house rebuilt, in the chair he used to fill, while the clock ticked the way it had ticked through every good year and every bad one. The grief hadn't left. It had just stopped sitting across from me and come around to sit beside me instead. Outside, the last of the evening light came through the windows and laid itself gold across the floorboards he sanded by hand. "I did what you asked," I said out loud, to the empty room and the empty chair and the man who wasn't there and somehow was. "I kept it safe." The clock struck the hour, slow and certain. And for the first time since that night, sitting at the head of our table with his ring warm on my hand, I wasn't afraid of the quiet anymore. I've had a long time to sit at that table and ask myself how a child I raised could carry poison into her own father's office and call it dinner. The answer I keep landing on isn't comfortable, but it's true. Nothing my daughter and her husband did happened all at once. It was built one small permission at a time, a little money skimmed and excused, a lie that worked, so they told a bigger one. Greed isn't a lightning strike, it's a slow leak, and by the time anybody noticed, the whole house was already underwater. Russell understood that better than I did. I used to think the strong part of him was how hard he worked, but it wasn't. It was how he refused to look away from an ugly truth even when it was wearing his own son-in-law's face. He saw what was coming, and instead of pretending, he did the quiet, unglamorous thing. He protected what mattered, before he could be talked out of it. That's the part I want you to take with you. Doing right is rarely loud. Most of the time it looks like a man signing papers at a bank on a Monday morning, saying very little, trusting the one person who'd earned it. I learned something about my own mind through all of this, too. For weeks I kept reaching for a softer explanation, because a mother's instinct is to forgive before she's even been wronged. But love without clear eyes is just a blindfold. The moment I let myself actually look at the badge logs, at Dana's shaking hands, at that little amber bottle hidden in a drawer, the truth stopped being unbearable and started being useful. Seeing clearly didn't make me bitter. It made me steady. There's a difference, and it took me 66 years to feel it. And the last thing, the hardest thing, is that none of it would have mattered if I'd folded. They counted on me being too grief-stricken, too old, too tired to fight a frozen account, and a slick attorney and the shame of dragging my own family into a courtroom. They were almost right. What carried me wasn't strength I was born with. It was the plain refusal to let the last thing Russell asked of me go undone. You don't need to feel brave to keep going. You just need to decide that quitting costs more than continuing. So if you're listening to this and somebody in your life is teaching you, slowly, that your kindness can be used as a doorway, pay attention. Be the kind of person who does right when it's quiet and costly. Keep your eyes open, even when the truth is family. And when the worst of it comes, plant your feet and stay standing. I kept my husband's ring on my thumb and his promise in my chest, and in the end, the people who tried to erase him are the ones the world forgot. He's the one still here at this table with me.